You know, I've seen a lot of littler YouTubers getting big traffic with clickbait Star Wars hate reviews, but leaving a long trail of angry comments all over this damned website has done nothing but poison my recommended for you feed beyond what I'm sure is all repair, so I figured it might be time to just bite the blaster bolt and say what I want to say. That's why you can actually see my stupid face. I look like shit, but I need to get this off my chest. Star Wars fans, I really hope you're here because I want to talk. I'd love to just give you my honest, objective opinions about Solo, a Star Wars story, but right now there is no such thing. The movie just has too much baggage, whether it's because the directors were fired, or young Han isn't who you would have cast, or pansexual Lando, or droid lives matter, or lingering animosity towards The Last Jedi for destroying your hopes and dreams and also kicking your puppy to death. Not to mention those who are calling for a boycott to prove they ain't down with this Disney-mandated SJW feminist bullshit, Kathleen Kennedy! Now is the time to go to war, brothers! Now is the time to fight! Skip this one movie and send a message to Disney that political agendas have no place in our Star Wars. A franchise literally built on politics. Yeah. The irony is, I'm pretty sure these boys, these self-described true Star Wars fans, are exactly who Solo, a Star Wars story was made for. Those who get excited when they hear Aurra Sing and Tag and Bink and Bosk and even references to the now decanonized Han and Lando adventures. Who expected to see that in a movie? It's the nerdiest Star Wars film we are ever likely to get, and do the nerds approve? As far as I can tell, if they bothered to see it at all, they scream incoherently at best and damn it with faint praise at worst. Predictably, the very same people who complained that The Last Jedi was too radical a departure are here saying that Solo is too tame and predictable. But I guess that's the real legacy of The Last Jedi. That film deliberately set you up to expect one thing so that it could give you something else. It was surprising, daring, it took risks, and whether you loved it or hated it, it blew your mind. Solo doesn't do that. It's just a fun pew-pew space movie that takes place in Star Wars and has Star Wars things in it like Twi'leks and bounty hunters and stormtroopers and giant planet-sized Lovecraftian cosmic horror monsters. Oh, wait. My point is it looks a lot like a comic book, or even like an updated version of those old adventure serials that George Lucas loved when he was a kid. You know, the ones that inspired Star Wars. So I think it'll be a long time before we can get a really honest opinion on the film's quality out of anyone. Now the movie is looking to underperform at the box office, and I see video after video in my poisoned recommendations bar with things like, Solo bombs! Can Kathleen Kennedy's job survive? Will Disney get the message that we don't want SJW's agendas in our Star Wars? Short answer, no. Long answer, no, and firing Kathleen Kennedy won't solve a single problem you want it to. Unless your problem is just the visual of a woman sitting in George Lucas's old office. A feminist woman, too. I mean, look at that t-shirt. If you want her gone, just so you don't have to see that anymore, well, I guess you'd get what you wanted, but it would be deeply unfair, and it would cause way more damage than it would fix. If your mission is to get all the quote-unquote SJWs out of Star Wars, you can't stop at the CEO, who after all spends 90% of her time going over spreadsheets and getting yelled at on the phone and not writing or directing any of the movies. 4 out of her 6 top producers are women, so they'd have to go. You'd have to cull the story group of almost every creative currently working there. I know some will say, well, we'll just put Dave Filoni in charge instead. But if you think that would get the liberal politics out of Star Wars, you've never seen the man's cartoons. But you know, at a certain point, this isn't really about Kathleen Kennedy. Hell, it isn't even really about Star Wars. It's about owning the libs. It's about opening yet another front in the left versus right world war that has taken over the entire goddamn world. It's about stomping out progressive politics wherever you find them and then saying they started it for being progressive in the first place. And yes, Star Wars has literally always been progressive. That's what the self-rescuing princesses and the diverse rebels versus the white male empire thing were all about. I'm sorry that political subtext used to go over your head and now it doesn't anymore, but George Lucas was many things. He was not subtle. He had the Emperor quoting George W. and has gone on record saying the rebels are basically the Viet Cong. His simple fable of a farm boy who becomes a mystical hero was also a vehicle for his frustrations about the Nixon administration, the Vietnam War, and the ways a democracy can collapse into a dictatorship. George was given a certain amount of slack for this because, hey, he created Star Wars in the first place, so if he wants to use it to voice his opinions, that's his prerogative. But Kathleen Kennedy enjoys no such protection. And keeping track of her pathology, according to the people who hate her, is like an exercise in going crazy. She's pathologically anti-man, which is why she exclusively hires white males to write and direct all her movies and TV shows and all the other projects. She's obsessed with pushing an SJW identity politics agenda, which is why we can't have a canonically queer character being queer in a movie. Everything you hated about The Last Jedi was her idea. Everything you hate about being an aging white male nerd in a society that feels like it's turning its focus away from you is because of her. I mean, just look at that t-shirt. Look at it. Clearly that t-shirt should cost her job. Okay, I'm gonna go on a bit of a tangent here and tell you where that shirt actually came from. It turns out that it has nothing to do with Star Wars.
It's a fucking Nike campaign.
Here's what happened. The students of Archer High School organized a film festival and invited Kathleen Kennedy to be their guest speaker. It's worth mentioning that Archer is a girls' school. I don't know if Nike was a partial sponsor of the event or if the students chose the shirt on their own, but it is definitely not a Lucasfilm product or part of any Star Wars tie-in. She didn't wear it to a premiere or a Star Wars-related press event. It was a party favor from when she agreed to talk to a bunch of high school kids. And according to Nike, the Force being referred to isn't even the Force, it's this. While we're here, it might be worth reading a quote from this event. What I realized when I stepped into this role was that it was important to people, recognizing that this was a modern mythology that had formed a lot of the culture of filmmaking for so many people. It carried with it a huge responsibility. I was stepping into something that wasn't mine. It was George Lucas's, who created the whole thing. But then it belonged to the fans. That was what I had to recognize and learn about so that I could carry that on and meet those expectations. What a Star Wars hating monster. And I know the trolls will be like, well, she's just lying, but what if she isn't? She doesn't give interviews very often, probably because when the fate of a company can depend on your every word, you have to conduct yourself with a lot of care. But since we're here, let's look at another much maligned quote that people love to bring up to prove just how anti-male she really is. I have a responsibility to the company I work with. I don't feel that I have a responsibility to cater in some way. I would never just seize on saying, well, this is a franchise that's appealed primarily to men for many, many years, and therefore I owe men something. Okay, I'll admit that the wording is a bit clunky, but she's not rejecting the idea of men or male fans, period. She's rejecting the idea of pandering. She didn't say, I hate men, I don't need them, Star Wars is now only for girls and non-binaries. She's rejecting that she has an obligation to aim only at men. Keep in mind, this was right before Rogue One came out, and Kathleen was getting asked by every news outlet on the planet to justify having 2 movies, literally 2 movies, multiple movies, that had female leads. Obviously, that shows an agenda, right? I mean, what are the odds that 2 movies in a row would just have female leads? That doesn't just happen, does it? Dare I say it, this level of suspicion flat out wouldn't exist if Kathleen Kennedy were male. If a man led a studio that released 2 whole movies that had female lead characters, no one would bat an eye. But because she's a woman, everyone thinks they see a conspiracy. An evil, feminist SJW conspiracy. Burn the witch. Chill the fuck out, people. It's just a t-shirt. It's not a political manifesto. Girls still get teased for liking Star Wars. She wore it for a photo op. Chill the fuck out. And there are legitimate criticisms to be made of the new movies and the way the studio is being run, but when a big chunk of those criticisms is coming from people in soy-low t-shirts ranting about cuckboys and anti-male bias and SJW LGBTQ spreading anti-white propaganda through movies that are really social engineering wrecking balls aimed at all of Western civilization, it's hard for the reasonable voices to really compete, especially when kicking out the CEO is being presented as the most urgently needed next step. Guys, kicking out the CEO is a last resort kind of thing. It's something you do when everything else has failed. Call me crazy, but I think demanding her head because of some vaguely leftist politics and a couple creative choices you don't like, made by people who aren't her, is a bit of an overreaction. Plus, if Kathleen left, someone would have to be CEO. Dave Filoni doesn't want that job. He'd hate being trapped in an office looking at spreadsheets while other people get to write and direct the movies. Llewyn Brennan is her current number 2. If she replaced her, would you call that an improvement? Or what if Carrie Hart, the current head of story, was moved into the job? Would you calm down then? No? I wonder why not. Are you advocating bringing a total stranger in to gut the company and remake it from the ground up? Because in that case, I'm hearing that you want to destroy Lucasfilm, and I'm going to wonder how concerned you really are about the future of Star Wars. Then again, I know for a certain group, this isn't about the future of Star Wars, it's about throwing haymakers at the left, and I have to say, if you really, sincerely hate the left more than you love Star Wars, I have to doubt how much you ever really loved Star Wars. Or understood it. So we know what the soy boys want, and God forbid they ever get it, but what about everyone else? There are fans out there who own shelves full of Star Wars merch, but really do feel like their favorite franchise is moving in the wrong direction. The comedy is awkward, the movies have twists that don't make sense and mysteries that go unexplained. They turned Luke Skywalker into a disgusting, grumpy old man. I don't like it. What happened to my Star Wars? Surely if Kathleen Kennedy goes, everything will be exactly like it was, won't it? No, it won't. And I hate to say it, but guys, we're getting older. Things we found funny when we were younger now just feels weird. We overlooked plot holes we now can't see beyond. What we want from our media has changed. We've changed. George Lucas was supreme leader, but George Lucas was never going to be around forever, and eventually the new creative team has to take over. I know you don't think their new stuff feels enough like the old stuff did, but I don't see what could possibly be done about that. We can't make it the 70s or the 80s or the early 00s again. If they did try and intentionally ape the older stuff, it would feel inauthentic and regressive. And a new generation has to be free to experiment and try new things, even things their elders disapprove of. They have to do this if they're going to tell their stories. It's the only way progress has ever happened. And I think for a lot of older fans, the idea of time moving beyond us is a difficult pill to swallow. It's so much easier to just blame one woman, or better yet, blame Disney, and boy, do a lot of people want to blame Disney. Jeremy Jahns is blaming Disney, and that's sad, because I usually like Jeremy Jahns, but, you know, if Jonathan Kasdan wants to be seen as cool and inclusive by saying, sure, Lando could be pansexual, that's not really the responsibility of his boss's boss's boss. There's no Disney corporate line on pansexuality, I'm pretty sure. So the bitter fans don't really know what they want, but they are always very, very clear about what they don't want, and by total coincidence, it always just happens to look like the very last thing they were given. Force Awakens was too familiar. The Last Jedi was too different. Rogue One was too dark. Solo is too light. We want jokes, but not like those jokes. We want change, but not like that kind of change. We want it to feel the same, but also want it to take more risks and stop playing it so safe. It's all very vague. And what I think it boils down to is we want to be who we were when we first laughed at Jar Jar's poop jokes, or Han Solo is fine here now. Everything's fine. How are you? And what I think we olds have to accept after a while is that not everything has to be about us. It can be about the little girls clutching their Forces of Destiny dolls, or the little boys playing with remote-controlled BB-8s. It can be the tweens dressing as Rey for Halloween and getting in lightsaber fights, or the gay black kid who gets to throw a blanket over his shoulders and become Lando, the coolest cat alive and haver of all of the sex with anything he pleases. Just for a moment. The Star Wars you and I love is preserved in amber. It'll never go anywhere. But the outside world is changing, and that's a hard thing, but ultimately a good thing. It means Star Wars will outlive us. I hope. Hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you can see it, you'll never make it through the night. On this dark night, I choose hope.